From London, I'm John Weeks, and this is The Standard. Another by-election, another Labour gain from the Tories.
The people of Blackpool South have spoken for Britain. They have said to Rishi Sunak and to the Conservatives, they've had enough. They've had enough for 14 years of the Conservatives being in power. They have lost trust of the British people, and Blackpool has had enough of this failed government, which has crashed the economy, destroyed our public services and put up taxes.
That was Labour candidate Chris Webb speaking after winning the Blackpool South by-election last night with a 26.33% swing, the third biggest from the Conservatives to Labour at a by-election since the Second World War. A fact celebrated by Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner in Blackpool.
Here in Blackpool, a message has been sent directly to the Prime Minister. Because this was a parliamentary vote. This was directly to Rishi Sunak to say we're fed up with your decline, your chaos and your division, and we want change.
The people of Blackpool have seen through the Tory lies and chaos, and they want change. We all want that change. Rishi Sunak, call that general election and let this country move forward.
But it's not only been a tough 24 hours for the Tories at the Blackpool South by-election. At the time of recording this podcast, the party's lost more than 200 seats in the local council elections across the country and are on track for one of their worst local election results ever. This morning, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak acknowledged a disappointing series of local election results. But there were some glimmers of hope for the Tories. They held onto the Tees Valley mayoralty as Ben Houchen was re-elected in the face of a Labour challenge. And they also held onto Harlow Council in Essex by a single seat, one of the key marginal constituencies that Labour are targeting for the general election. So, just how damning are the overall losses for the Conservatives? And what is Rishi Sunak planning for his next move? Joining me now is our Deputy Political Editor Jitendra Joshi and our Chief Political Correspondent Rachael Burford. So it's been quite a significant shock for the Tories over the last 24 hours or so. Starting with the Blackpool South by-election, just how big a win is this for Labour?
Blackpool South showed a swing from the Tories to Labour of more than 26%. That's the third biggest swing from one party to another since the Second World War. It's pretty seismic in terms of the sort of shifts of opinion that we're seeing, not just in Blackpool South, but in other recent by-election wins by Labour or indeed by the Liberal Democrats in previously Tory seats. The government, the Conservatives are arguing that there were particular sort of one-off factors that hurt them in Blackpool South, not least the disgrace that their MP Scott Benton found himself in after he was caught trying to peddle for influence on behalf of betting interests in the Commons. But that said, this is not a one-off. It's part of a trend that we've been seeing over the last couple of years of pretty disastrous by-election results for the Conservatives. So in that regard, it suggests a sign of things to come, perhaps, whenever the general election is held.
And I understand the Reform UK party actually did quite well in Blackpool. They haven't done so well at the local elections. Could they pose a threat to the Conservatives when it does come to the general election?
So I think obviously this result in Blackpool South is very worrying for the Conservatives in regard to Reform. Reform came third, but only just. I think it was about 117 votes behind the Tories they were. And that is going to be very worrying for Rishi Sunak and the party in general, especially in those sort of red wall areas that they're sort of hoping to just cling on to at the next general election. Whether some of their voters up there may be starting to turn to Reform. Now, I think we have to remember about Blackpool South is turnout has been very low. So I think it's just over 32% of people actually turned out compared to the almost 60% of people that turned out in 2019. So we don't know how many Tories just sort of stayed at home because they didn't want to vote for this government, and how many came out as sort of a protest vote with a protest vote for Reform. But I think certainly there'll be people in number 10 today looking at Reform's vote share in that by-election and perhaps how reform candidates do as the results start coming in today, and thinking, this could be quite worrying when it comes to the general election later this year.
And looking at the local elections across the country then, as it stands now on early Friday afternoon, what are the figures saying in terms of won and lost seats?
At the moment, we've still got a lot of councils left to declare. Obviously, the big ones are the mayoral elections in the North, the Midlands, and of course in London. But as we stand at the moment, as we're recording, the Conservatives have lost 140 seats at councils across England. Labour have won 64, the Lib Dems have won 21, and Independents have won 40. The Greens have also should be quite pleased because they've won 15 seats so far. So, it is looking like it's going to be quite devastating for the Conservatives. And I think at the moment they're just really, really hoping they'll be able to hold on to those big mayoral seats they have in the Midlands and North.
Let's take a quick break now. Coming up in part 2.
Rishi Sunak would appear to be safe for now. That doesn't mean that some Tory malcontents might not start agitating for him, but I think most sensible opinion, as it were, realises that they need to just show that if they're to have any hope, they need to show progress and stability.
Now, Jit, you sort of referenced how these local elections sort of give a clue as to what could happen in the upcoming general election. And I understand results in the commuter belt will actually give the biggest clue as to how well Sir Keir Starmer will do. Why is that?
That's right. So, job one for Labour after 2019 was to rebuild their support in the so-called Red Wall in northern England. Now, once having stabilised the support there, then the job two was to move on to the offensive into the so-called Blue Wall, which is the Tory heartland in southern England. And it's not just a target for Labour, it's a huge target for the Liberal Democrats as well. So we've already seen plenty of signs in by-elections and other results of Labour rebuilding in the Red Wall. Today, now what we're seeing is proof that the Tory vote is vulnerable, if not collapsing, in parts of the Blue Wall. So we've seen surprising results in places like Hampshire, including the area around Aldershot, a borough council called Rushmore, which is the home of the British Army and has never ceded to Labour control. That's now changed as a result of yesterday's elections. The Tories have lost power there after 24 years, and Labour have taken control for the first time in what they're saying is a truly historic result. And it's not just Labour who are crying. The Liberal Democrats are talking about serious advances elsewhere in Hampshire, including particular seats, one held by Penny Mordaunt, the Conservative leader of the House of Commons, who's touted as a potential leader if Rishi Sunak is forced out. They're also looking at areas around the Fareham seat held by Suella Braverman. That's a longer shot, but it goes to show that levels of ambition for the opposition parties are running pretty high. Labour also scored some notable advances in Essex, in the sort of Brexit pro-Leave strongholds that helped sway the 2016 referendum. Those are now places like Thurrock are now going back to Labour. So, as with the Blackpool South by-election, it's a potentially dismal sign for the Tories if those sort of trends hold up in the general election.
And you just touched on it there, Jit. There have been rumours of MPs thinking about trying to oust Rishi Sunak. Could these local election results convince more MPs to join that cause?
They could, but there's a sense that having swapped two leaders already since Boris Johnson's victory in 2019, they're really not going to persuade many people that they're a serious and credible party of government if they keep doing this. Rishi Sunak would appear to be safe for now. That doesn't mean that some Tory malcontents might not start agitating for him, but I think most sensible opinion, as it were, realises that they need to just show that if they're to have any hope, They need to show progress and stability in areas like the economy, in fighting inflation, in getting to grips with the small boats crisis, which is Rishi Sunak's flagship policy to start deportations to Rwanda. They need to get on with that if they're going to have any hope of not necessarily winning the election, but at least limiting their losses. There is a sense that having another destabilising and high-profile bout of bloodletting through a leadership election really is not going to impress the electorate.
I think also it's really interesting this morning, even as the results were sort of dripping in, we had very few. You saw some of the of Rishi Sunak's biggest critics in the Tory party. You know, MPs like Andrea Jenkins, for example, saying, we won't get the numbers to oust him now, but really sort of trying to push Number 10 to develop a more right-wing approach to certain policies.
And there's a poll out by a Labour-leaning pressure group called Labour Together. They have been polling Conservative members to look at, if there were to be a leadership election, who might come out on top. Penny Mordaunt is one perennial person spoken of who's quite popular with the Tory grassroots, but the most popular person they would opt for is Nigel Farage, and he's not even a Tory member.
It feels now like all eyes are on the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in terms of what he does next, really, sort of in response to the local elections. Could these results prompt him to bring forward the general election and have it sooner, or perhaps hold a later election to give him more time to sort of regain some support?
I think you see a lot of Labour figures particularly really calling for a June-July election, and they want one as soon as possible, obviously. When you're, 20 points ahead in the polls, of course you want an election straight away. But I think Number 10, Rishi Sunak, has been quite consistent in saying the election will be in the second half of the year, and he's looking at the sort of October, November mark. I think he wants to serve out 2 years as Prime Minister. I think that he wants to see the Rwanda scheme, that we've seen the sort of first people flying off to Rwanda now, and he's got that through the Commons. I think he wants to see that go through and perhaps try and see if that gives him any kind of poll boost. I think they're hoping for a little bit of bounce in the economy, perhaps, and that'll come later in the year. So I can't see at the moment as having a summer election. I think October, November is still where Number 10 are thinking it's gonna fall. And
playing into that, there's the sense that they've got one last card they could try to play on the economy, which is more tax giveaways. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has been dropping heavy hints that that's exactly what he's looking at in a potential autumn statement, which he says could conceivably come in September, which then leads us into that sort of October, November timeframe. There's a strong sense overall that, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Parties that are 20 points behind in the polls don't go for a general election any sooner than they have to.
There's more news, interviews and analysis in the Evening Standard newspaper and at standard.co.uk. Thanks for listening. We're back on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock.